Leadership. It's the best-selling leadership book ever written, sold millions of copies, over 1 million in China alone, 49 languages. And there are 2 laws that I want to start my teaching off with today to build the foundation for what I would call the 5 levels of leadership. The first law is the law of the lid, L-I-D, and the law of the lid just simply says how well you lead determines how well you succeed. How well I lead determines how well I succeed. In other words, the law of the lid just basically says that when you learn how to lead well, you'll do well. And if you don't know how to lead well, you won't do well. It doesn't matter what profession you're in. It doesn't matter what your occupation, your career. Basically, everything rises and falls on leadership. Now, that's fact. That's just not somebody that's in love with leadership teaching, which I am in love with leadership. That's somebody that just understands the fact that in the history of civilization, it doesn't matter whether it's government, business, education, religious, it doesn't matter. In fact, when I'm at George Washington University, or if I'm at West Point, or at the United Nations teaching leadership, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter. History absolutely supports the fact that everything rises and falls on leadership. Not most things, not some things. Everything rises and falls on leadership. And when you lead and do well, you do well. And if you don't know how to lead well, you won't do well. If this hand, visually explained, if this hand was my leadership lid, this is how well John Maxwell led. This was my ability to lead right here. This was my leadership ceiling, my lid. And this hand represents my business. Visually, what this means is very simple. That my business comes under my leadership lid, but can go no higher. And it can go no higher because my lid of leadership won't allow it to go any higher. And in the history of humanity, it's never happened in government, business, again, education, or religion, where there was a leadership lid on a country or an organization, and somehow the business went above that lid and just continued to grow and prosper. It doesn't happen. It has never happened. It ain't going to happen with you. It ain't going to happen with me. Is it going to happen? The reason I teach leadership, the reason I'm so passionate about it is because I understand it. And I understand that when you learn to lead well, you do well. And if you don't know how to lead well, you just won't do well. You may work hard. You may just absolutely have a great heart, great attitude, great spirit, the whole deal. But everything rises and falls on leadership. So when I do Q&A, and people ask questions, one of the most common questions I hear in Q&A when we're teaching leadership is somebody raises their hand, they'll say, John, are leaders born? Whenever they ask me the question, are leaders born, I always give the same answer. Of course they are. Think about that question. I've never met an unborn leader. Don't particularly want to either. Thank you very much. You see, what they're really asking is not are leaders born. What they're really asking is that when you're born, are there some that they've got it, so they go to the front of the line, and there's some people, they don't got it, so they go to the end of the line. That's what they're asking. And by all means, people have different tendencies, giftedness, and some might lean toward leadership, no doubt about that. But you can learn to lead. You can do that. And I know that for a fact. I have the largest leadership training organization in the world. We've trained 5 million leaders in every country of the world. Got leadership down. Got training down. Understand how to train leaders. I have a company, the John Maxwell Company, that trains Microsoft and Delta. And we train leaders. We understand leadership. We got this leadership thing down. And the beautiful thing is that you can learn to lead. So look at your neighbor that you're sitting beside and say to them, even you can learn to lead. Go ahead and tell them.
Even you can learn to lead. Thank you.
And by the way, you can learn to lead. Now go back to the visual illustration for just a second of the law of the lid. If this is how well John leads, let's say I'm an average leader. I'm a 5 from a 1 to 10. I'm a 5. What that means is my business is a 4. And let me tell you something. Is it going to get any higher? If my leadership lid is a 5, it is impossible to have a 5 lid on your leadership and have a 7 or 8 business. It's never happened. So don't go to Disneyland. It ain't going to happen with you. This lid will hold it down. Now, here's the great news. If I'm a 5 as a leader, I can learn to lead. I can learn how to lead better, that's for sure. And I can go from a 5 to a 6 to a 7, perhaps over time. because it does take time. I could maybe become an 8. Now what's happened is, every time I raise my leadership lid and I become a better leader, look what happens to my business. Now my organization, my business, it has room to grow, and it can go from a 4 to a 5 to a 6 to 7. In fact, business, the growth of it follows leadership. Always has. Always will. People say, well, how do I grow my company? How do I grow my business? It's very simple. Grow your leaders. Everything rises and falls on leadership. When your leaders get better, your business gets better. When you get better leaders and more leaders, everything gets better. It just does. That's the law of the lid. Powerful, powerful law. But there's another one I want to give just for a couple of minutes, and then I want to teach the 5 levels of leadership, and that's called the law of process. And the law of process just simply says, leaders develop daily, not in a day. In other words, you and I just don't get good as a leader overnight. It takes a process of time. And that's a challenge. And the reason it's a challenge is because what happens is, people call me all the time, or call our companies, and they say, we want you to train our leaders, and we really need some leaders quick. And so, could you come in and kind of do it like a kind of a mass, fast leadership training program? And boy, I mean, could we just kind of develop some leaders in the next 4 to 5 weeks? And you can't do that. You see, the problem is, because we have such a leadership shortage, and we do, my gosh, huge leadership shortage, no matter where I go in the world, leadership shortage. Can I tell you something? I've never been anywhere that didn't have the same problem. Not enough leaders, and not enough good leaders. I mean, you talk about a secure occupation. You talk about finding the sweet spot as far as a job. I've never gone to any business. I mean, even the top businesses. I've never gone to any company, and they look at me and say, you know what, John, we have so many great leaders. Could you weed out a few? I've never had anybody say, well, we have a leadership glut at the top. Doesn't happen. Every place, I can promise you, in your company, any company, not enough leaders, not enough good leaders. But the tendency is that we think that we can develop them fast. We can't. What we want to do is we want to get in our companies like a leadership microwave, where we could get a leadership program and put them in the microwave and push some numbers and zap them. You know what I mean? And that's why. And by the way, that's what a lot of companies do. They zap their leaders. They put them in their company leadership microwave, and that's why they got so many Pop-Tarts running around. I mean, I see them all the time. I just say, well, they've gone to microwave you. I can see that. Yeah, they're a Pop-Tart for sure. Need to quit trying to microwave them. And we need to start crock-potting. You got to have a leadership culture. When Delta filed Chapter 11 9 years ago, Ed Bastian, the president of Delta, called me up and said, John, I need a long lunch. And so we sat down. We had a long lunch for about 3 hours. He said, John, he said, filed Chapter 11, doesn't look good. If you were the president of the company, what would you do? And I said, Ed, your planes are fine. You don't have a plane problem. You got a leadership culture problem. And I know that because I fly on your planes. You haven't really worked with your people understanding big picture. They see small picture. They see their picture. They don't even see the customer's picture. I said, I understand that because first of all, when you get on any plane, one of the first things they tell you is the flight attendants are there for your safety. Thank you. I've flown several million miles, haven't gone down yet. I'm glad they're there for my safety, and if we have a bad day, I hope they help me. But in the meantime, I'd like for them to do some service and hospitality. It's just a thought. I'd like for them to take care of the customer and kind of smile a little bit. I got a list of about a dozen things that could kind of improve their life. He said, what would you do? I said, I'd call every flight attendant of Delta in, and I'd have them in small groups of about 150 to 200. I'd spend a day with them, and I would begin to develop a leadership culture. I wish I had time to talk about this. Can I tell you something? Culture eats vision for lunch. Totally. I mean, it's not even like 2 to 1. It's 10 to 1. Because culture is behavior. Vision's where you're going. Can I tell you? I can tell you where you're going to go. Where you're going to go, exactly what your behavior is. What you do is where you're going to go, and your culture determines that. And I said, you don't have a leadership culture in your company. They did exactly that, by the way. They had me come, they brought in their top 3,300 people. I spent a day with them, teaching them leadership in a cultural type of setting, and what does that mean besides your job, and how do you understand that, whether you're the receptionist out front or the CEO, doesn't really matter. It's a big picture. Most people don't see the big picture, they see their picture. Of course, now it's the #1 airline in the world, which is really beautiful, because when you're that big and you can turn it around that quick, it just shows what happens. If you sat down with Ed Bastian right now, Richard Anderson, he was talking, they'd just say, when Delta got a leadership culture, everything changed. Why? Because everything, my friend, rises and falls on leadership. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, because leadership is a process, it's a verb, not a noun. 95% of people don't understand. They think leadership's a noun, they think it's a title, they think it's a position. So what I want to do is I want to work this process and share with you on the screen the 5 levels of leadership, okay? And this is just simple stuff that will just work for you. In fact, look at your neighbor and say, you really need to listen. This will help. Go ahead and tell them.
You need to listen.
It really will.